Hakarongo mai ki te reo e tangi nei, e ringi hia mai ana, mai aku ka mō i ngā roi mātai. Whiti mai te rā, ngaro ana te mamai, ngaro roa te pouri. Kaua e mauiwi, ua penei ki te pō. Maranga mai e te iwi, o ngā hapu ngā puhi, kia mau, kia u, kia pu, puri ai, i ngā akoranga e. Ko te mea tuatahi kei te hiahia hau kia mihi atu kia kauta e huihui mai nei i tēnei rā. I roto i tēnei whenua tino ātāhua, ko te mea tuarua kei te hiahia hau kia mihi atu kia Carmen Grey Mountain, me ngā iwi Shivwits e noho mai ki konei. Kia kautama e huihui mai nei i tēnei rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. It's my pleasure to talk to you today, and I don't mean to, well, I do. I am bringing my own concerns or issues or my feelings today before you, but my brother kind of like changed my whole day when he showed me a Facebook, whatever you call those things, you know, someone put something on Facebook that I think either came from my sister or from my brother, and it reminded me that 39 years ago today, my father passed away. And so that's a good way to start, actually, because I think I was lucky to have my father. I was adopted by my auntie, who of course was married to my father who raised me. And so I have interesting experiences as an adopted child, growing up in a very loving household. And I think talking about my father is very significant for this occasion because my father never touched my mother in a hurtful way. I'm sure he touched her in other ways, but, but not in a hurtful way. In fact, for a man to touch a woman was totally against his family practices. And also, Sheldon was talking about never being corporally punished by his father. I was once with this little rubber slipper because I think I might have needed it. But my father was really against any type of violence, and I think it was because he was raised with violence in his home. He was the second youngest, and he and his younger brother, who was the youngest, were severely treated by our grandparents. And his younger brother left as soon as he could and vowed that he would only return home in a pine box. And that's how he returned. So I am happy to say that it's possible to break cycles of violence because I think my father did it quite well. On the other hand, he spoiled me rotten, so that's why I'm the terrible person that I am today. I blame my father, and the bad news is I think I'm becoming my mother. And remember, these are my adopted parents. And in fact, my siblings and I are going to have a little competition to determine who has become most like our mother. And I could spend the rest of the day talking about how that's happened in my life. But just by way of translation, I like to start off with that song, although I do know lots of other Māori songs. My tribe is called Ngāpuhi. I'm from the Taitokero district of Aotearoa, New Zealand. My sub-tribes, which are kind of like clans, Te Honi Honi and Te Pōpoto on my mother's side, and Te Whiu on my father's side. Our ceremonial plaza is called Tauwhara. Our meeting house is called the Rangiā Whio Whio. Our river is called Waitangi, our mountain is called Hakataha, and our great ancestor is a man by the name of Rahiri, from whom all our tribe descends. And that's basically, my tokens of identity. Okay, and I felt the need to be even more Māori. That's the name of our people. It's not the name of a race, but that's how it's applied to us as a race. They say, the way that it was told to me is that when the first Europeans arrived, they asked our people what we were. That was a very confusing question to them, and they answered in the best way that they could. We're normal human beings, Māori. And so that word has stuck with us ever since. Not unlike some of the experiences of other people. Okay, but also I felt like being Māori because for a number of reasons, because of the significance of the day. And so in our way, it's appropriate for us to recognize the people who hold the spirit of this land and who keep the fires of this land burning, this particular area, which of course would be the Shivwits. And so we pay our deepest respects to you, and for this opportunity for us to take a moment of your air, a little bit of your air, as we tell you about who we are and why things are important to us. And I'm going to just go very quickly through what I wanted to say, and that might change so that Tina has some time. And it's significant to me that Tina follows me rather than is before me, because in the Māori way, the first voice that's heard on any occasion, and I wasn't here for the beginning of this, is a woman. And the last voice heard on any occasion is a woman. Now, I got to tell this story. So when I came to the United States, I would hear men complaining about having woman bosses. I thought that was the way of the world. And in fact, I like to say that Maoris, like other Polynesians, but I think we're a little bit better, are good rugby players. We're better rugby players, is what I mean. And I think it's because we were good at dodging the swats of our aunties and uncles, right, and the rest of our family. Okay, we became fast on our feet. Okay, so let's get right to the point. And I'm going to pick on people if no one responds. I want us as a group to talk about those things that we hold most valuable in our lives. Come on, someone come up with something. Family. What else?
Spiritual beliefs.
Oh, okay, that has to go up to the top. Okay. Why?
Love. Because a lot of times they are children.
I might build on that later, I don't know. There's one that doesn't like me, by the way. Have you heard?
My land.
Land, space, land. Let's just put land. Sure, okay, because my printing is awful.
The deaf community really values communication.
Oh, communications. So I'm going to add to that language.
Yes.
Yes.
My family history.
Oh, can we just put that under history? Mm-hmm. Okay. What else?
Traditions.
Okay, traditions.
Culture.
Okay, so we're going to...
Spirituality.
Yeah, we've got...
And land.
Okay.
Just put Yolanda.
So, in a sense, what you have to say is already up there. But for some people, traditions becomes this expansive subject area. So it's still a little bit nebulous. How about lifestyle practices? Would that do for now?
No.
Okay, then help us.
So I think maybe it's the identity through traditions.
Okay, identity. That's
Practices.
yeah. I think that's something that we can put more of a grasp on. Yeah, put Lifeways up too. What else? Yes.
Compassion.
Ooh. Okay, put compassion. Relationships, compassion and relationships. Connections to who or what? Okay, so that's connections to people. What else? Yes.
Our higher power.
Does that fit under spirituality good enough for you?
Yeah, but she said spirituality, but I didn't see it.
Oh, yeah, it's right at the top. To me, it was the most important. That's why I left space for it. Actually, there's one more important thing that belongs up there, but you haven't said it. Ooh, who was that? Food, right under spirituality, please. Okay, that gives us a lot to talk about, but is there something else that desperately belongs up there? Oh, who said that? Freedoms. Can we, does this stick?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I'm going to put it on the door because I don't think they can complain about that, and I just might bring it back out when we need. Anything else? That was freedom. Oh, yes, safety, security. Sanity is, I want to say, mind stability.
Self-actualization. Being, knowing, fully understanding and knowing who I am and my purpose.
No, I'm going to put, I think self-actualization is good. Okay, we've got a lot to talk about, and I'm not sure if we're going to be able to talk about everything. Okay, for the person who said spirituality, do you want to fess up? Why?
It's what keeps me grounded in life and makes me feel like I have purpose and gives me support.
Okay, good, thank you. Food? No explanation for that one. Did you want to say something about food?
I said food because that's one thing that can bring a family together, and they're preparing of food because there are some cultural and ancestral values to certain foods.
Yeah, give you an example, really fast if I can. So, my sister is the oldest daughter of a matrilineal, matriarchal family, and she was engaged to be married to a Chinese man. And you know who's the most important person in any Chinese family is actually the eldest son. Okay, so here's two families, matrilineal and patrilineal, and they want to organize a wedding, right? And so the potential conflict was who's going to pay for the wedding. And it's not like you pay for it, it's more like, no, I have to pay for it because this is what we do. Okay, this is what they did. They came together and they put their money together and had a bigger wedding. Okay, now the thing that changed though is that at Maori weddings, who prepares the food, who gathers the food? The family. Because we had enough money, the wedding was catered, and we didn't have the opportunity to have those family interactions. And you know, the men would go out and go fishing. The young people would go out and collect watercress, because that's an important part of what we eat. And the woman would get together and do this and that. And that was an all important in re-establishing those family connections. Okay, we didn't have that opportunity. So food is more than just about eating, but it's also about other things. Okay, let's go to family kinship. Who said that? Okay, why is that important?
Well, because it's where I belong. It's part of who I am, and my family is my blood.
Okay, that's enough. Animals. Why? You elaborate a little bit, but re-educate us.
Because they love us. And it's just, like, we've had animals
that relationship with them fulfills us?
Yes, I wanted to say that animals tend to love you unconditionally, although I know of exceptions to that rule. Not in this particular case, but we had someone that used to work for us, and she had this little wiener dog, and whenever her husband got angry or yelled at the dog, it would get back at them by urinating on everything. Okay. Land.
Because land reconnects me with what is real.
Yes, and I'm going to jump ahead, and only because I might forget about it later. That takes on an even deeper meaning for tribal people, whether it be my own people or whether it the people that live here. And what is that difference with land?
I don't think I own the land. The land owns me.
Okay, so what are we saying? Yes. And it's right. Okay, so actually our spirituality, actually some of that spiritual strength, is derived from the land on which we walk. Okay, and I think I've been pretty lucky as a person because although this is not my homeland, I've been able to connect to it probably through my adopted family who are from the Ute Reservation in Fort Duchesne, Utah. And I've been able to kind of like, and I hate to use this word, kind of sap off their spiritual strength. And let me tell you, I've learned so many things. I've made so much more sense about my own identity through the interaction with my Ute family. And I had another adopted family in Hawaii, and that was a means by which I was able to connect to the islands, although Māori say that traditionally they came from the island of Hawaii, and they can even pinpoint the place where their canoe left to sail off to New Zealand. So we do have a genealogical connection with Hawaii, but my real spirituality originally came from New Zealand, because we believe similarly that the earth is our mother and the sky is our father, and at one time they were cleaved together in a deep embrace, and their children lived between them. And they were separated by their godsons, and the sky father drifted up into the heavens, and the earth mother stayed there, and the children stayed with the mother. And so that helped to establish a precedence in Māori society. If the parents ever split, the children would stay with the mother. However, one of the godsons chose not to stay with his mother. He wanted to go up with his father and be in the sky. So that also establishes another precedence, is that when children are able to make the decisions for themselves, they can maybe go with the other parents. Now, as it is in Māori society, even though we're matrilineal, matriarchal, I should say, we actually inherit through both the mother and the father. So I cite the genealogies of my mother and I cite the genealogies of my father, because they are both part of who I am. And I think anthropologists call that cognatics. So we're a cognatic society. Ooh, language and communication. Who said? Why is that important?
Well, and especially for the deaf, because we experience a lot of communication barriers. So often we don't have access to information and to things that are going on around us. So we really value that and cherish that information through communication. So
in another life, part of my jurisdiction was a congregation of people who were deaf, and so they communicated through sign. And okay, so is language and communication just about understanding the words and how they fit together?
No.
What is it?
No. Communication is our wants, our dreams, our pain, our needs. That's how we build relationships. You can't have a relationship without communication.
And you can't have communication without a relationship, at least not effective communication. So what am I saying? And someone can dispute that if they want.
I think that what it does is that it creates our reality.
Okay, explain that a little, because I'm not disagreeing with
I
it.
mean that if I say that this is a chair, and you don't understand what I'm saying, that this is a chair, and then we do understand, then this becomes a reality to you. We share this information. It's the way that we share a reality and we build.
But I might say to you, ka hore he turu tēnei.
And I will say, okay, it's ka hori atunite.
No, I just said, no, this is a chair. Sorry, in Māori. Okay.
But I think language is so important because it's how we build common understanding.
No, I totally agree with you. Do you want to say something?
I think communication, and more than just words, but the nonverbals and everything, connect two individuals together. One person and everything that they share inside, we can't know about, except that it's through some concrete vehicle, which is communication, that we're able to connect those two people.
Yes, and sometimes we relegate our experience to words, or sometimes we don't. And I'm going to make kind of like point my brother out, and we're going to have an argument on the way back to Las Vegas, but never mind. Because we've got these sounds that we make that are not words, but we just know what we're talking about because the sound is based in the context. And the sound is also based in history and experience. Okay, so we don't actually have to say the words, we make a sound and we know that what we mean. And more importantly, so this is how our life has been. We used to live in this apartment that just had one bathroom and two bedrooms in the living room area, and we could always see each other. And the relationship was good. And then we moved to another house that had 2 floors, that had 3 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, and but at least our bedrooms were on the same floor, so we could still, there was still that feeling of togetherness and communication. Now, I just have to say this: we live in a house that, first of all, is immorally too big for 2 people, and there are 4 bedrooms and 2 floors. And his bedroom still is, but where he used to sleep was downstairs and I was upstairs. So I would just go to the banister and make our noise, and he'd reply. And that's just to remind us that that connection is still there. Okay. So language is a lot. It's not just words, it's more than that. And I don't know Japanese, but I know a little bit about how Japanese works. And when you start your sentence, the sentence is constructed in a way that you have an opportunity to kind of like view the response or the impending response of the person that you're talking to, and you can actually change your sentence before you get to the end of it to a way that's not going to be offensive to that person. And that's all I can say. You'll have to just, if you want to know more, you'll have to look it up yourself. But so language is, it's quite a remarkable thing. Traditions, identity, and cultural practices. Yolanda?
I think that when we talk about, I was telling friends just recently that when I first moved to the city in Salt Lake, I was very young, and I was waiting at a bus stop right downtown, and a gentleman came up to me and sat right by me and started to talk to me. And he said, "So where are you from?" And I began to tell him, I had just been fresh off the reservation. I began to tell him about the Navajo people's creation story and how man and women were formed. And I think he was really anxious to get out of there. He got on the bus and left. But the identity piece is so strong, and it has to be, it's something that gives me confidence. It also guides my relationships and my career. and also how I interpret the rest of the world is through my identity.
Yeah, Māori would say it gives you a place on which to stand. And from where you stand, you interact with your environment and other people in the world. Okay, I have to jump a little bit. Let's try freedom. Who said freedom?
I think our freedom gives us the openness to be able to express ourselves and be who we want to be.
Yeah, you know, different people say interesting things about freedom, like how your freedom ends where another person starts. Or some people say that in order to enjoy one freedom, you have to give up another freedom. So it's a very complex subject to talk about. It's not as simple as sometimes we like to think it is. Okay, so spirituality, go back to that person. Who said spirituality? What would happen to you if your opportunities to express and feel your spirituality were taken away from you?
Beyond my comprehension.
Yeah, see, you don't even have to say anything. We can just, for those of you who are around her, we can tell what you're feeling just by your action. Yes, it could be beyond your comprehension. Let's talk about food. Where's our food person? What would happen if your food were taken away from you?
I wouldn't survive.
Now, your food could be replaced by other foods.
Yeah, but I'd miss my food.
Okay, it's good enough for me right now. Let's go to land. Who said land? What would happen to you if your land were taken from under you?
I'd lose my connections.
Plus you'd lose your house, right, if you've got your house on it.
Yeah.
Okay, or maybe you can, some people have the ability to take their house with them, but...
I could live in an apartment, but the thing is, when I work with the land, I reconnect with who I am.
Okay, let's pick on one more. Language. Who said language? Communication. Oh, yeah. Okay, so someone is going to have to speak on her behalf. And I think it's you.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll do my best.
what would happen if your ability to communicate with others were taken away from you?
There'd be no bridge to get across to share information. There'd just be no way.
See, now the first thing that I might,
Right?
the first thing that I might say as a non-signing person is that, okay, if you can't see what people are signing, then how can you communicate? But I've seen otherwise, because I've seen them go like this. Have you seen people communicate like that, where that you feel the signs?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry to become familiar with you. Okay, now I'm going to pick on one. I'm going to investigate. Well, let me say this first. In every case, everything up there was taken from American Indians. Now, is it any wonder that some sort of dysfunctionality may exist in American societies? You take these things that are the mainstay of who they are, the mainstay of their beliefs, and what's left. Now, people have survived. Obviously, people have survived. There's Karma, there's Renee, there's Angie, and there's Paul. Well, I don't know. If she's left, we don't know if she survived or not. No, I'm just teasing. Okay. I'm going to talk about spirituality because I think, as Yolanda suggests, you know, all those things there actually make up the spirituality of a person. But I'm going to pick on a couple of things that were particularly taken away from American Indians because it therefore justifies me being here. Oh, that was a rather arrogant thing to say. Okay. Now, how do I approach this? Okay, what has, for those of you who have attended ceremonies, like, you know, when Pacific Islanders are involved in ceremonies, and if we're sick, one of the things that we're told to do is go and bathe in the ocean, okay, because the salt is supposed to help us. And I think I don't need to be sick to go to the ocean anyway, but you know, it's supposed to draw some of the toxins out of you. I should mention that in the Māori creation stories, the Sky Father was actually married to two people. Yeah, we had polygamy. We quite possibly invented it. Okay, but the Sky Father was not only married to the Earth Mother, he was also married to the Ocean Maiden. See, we who are of the people of the islands have a connection to the sea and to the land. And I don't see that there's any conflict in me right now. I kind of like them both. Okay, so for us, in times of trouble, we do bathe in the ocean, I guess because that's our mother. I'm going to talk about one other thing that tends to be a part of American Indian spirituality. Not all tribes are the same, so I'm speaking in generalities, and that's the use of tobacco. Okay, what are some of the tobaccos that were traditionally used by the indigenous people of Utah? Anyone want to help me out with that? Cedar. Sage. Someone started to say it. Mountain tobacco. Red willow. There are a few other things. And I could be wrong here, so you know, don't take this as gospel. I actually think the nicotine type tobacco was very rarely, if ever, used in pre-contact Utah. That came from other parts of the country because the nicotine tobacco is not native to this area. It couldn't be, it didn't grow here. It can grow here. I just throw some tobacco seeds into my front garden, and they kept on popping up for 3 years in a row. You know, so they can grow in this environment. Now, yeah, and the flowers are nice. Okay, so talking about traditional tobacco is probably the best example of how a traditional cultural icon has become seriously bastardized. Okay, what happens to the tobacco that we go and buy down in the stores? They add who knows how many chemicals, either through the growth of the tobacco. Now, traditionally, natural fertilizers were used to grow traditional tobacco because the tobacco absorbs whatever is around it in the soil. So if you put in commercial fertilizers, which include polonium-210, which is radioactive, that goes into the plant. Now, the commercial tobacco is also soaked in a variety of substances that include arsenic, cyanide, formaldehyde, and a whole host of other things. It's actually desecrated the traditional tobacco. Now, the traditional nicotine tobacco does have nicotine in it. Don't get me wrong on that. But it's my understanding that the traditional way of using that sort of tobacco was never to inhale it, but to take it in your mouth and blow it out. Okay, so I'm stating that as something that represents the bastardization of a spiritual icon. And it's not the only one. You know, we can sit down and come up with several things that have been taken by one culture and appropriated inappropriately by another culture and has changed its meaning. Okay. Now, I'm going to end with this point. I want you to think to yourselves how important these things are to you. We've talked about how important they are if they're taken away from you, and consider what happens to tribes. You know, tradition and identity and kinship and other things up there also talk about, refer to what do you call rites of passage. Okay. It also, so if rites of passage are taken away, you know, there's a little bit of imbalance in the society, okay? But if we also consider the fact that rites of passage also includes a person's passage to womanhood or manhood, and you take those away, prime example, hunting tribes, you turn them into gardeners. It simply doesn't work psychologically. Okay, you're castrating the men when you turn them from hunters into gardeners. Now, some tribes gardened, and their spirituality is a little bit more intact because of their gardening practices. But for those who followed the herds, and now they have to be stuck in one place, and men have no way of establishing their manhood, what else are you going to expect? Okay, then when you put kids in boarding schools, and young people are separated from the people who have been raising kids for thousands of years, and they lose that ability to raise kids, because let me tell you, they didn't learn that in the boarding schools. They learned how to iron clothes, how to clean the houses, how to feed the chickens, or the ducks, as Dan Edwards would like to say, but they didn't learn how to make those kinship ties and how to learn how to raise families. Okay. So we've actually left American Indian nations in not a very good state, but people have survived, and maybe Tina has some answers as to why that might happen. I don't know if that was a good segue, but that's it.
What if I don't?
And if she doesn't, then you can see me out in the hall afterwards.
Do I need that thing?
Oh yeah, you do. Oh, any questions before I turn the mic over?
Yeah,
Good.
I just wanted
Yes.
to comment that you talked about how something that is very good has been bastardized. And one of the things that I'm interested in is how the native diet has changed. Food has actually turned to poison.
Yes, and I'm going to try and spend just 30 seconds on that. Good luck. No, actually, we're so much a part of what we eat. I've got a brother who's a health fanatic, and he's sitting right there at the back, and I was able to get permission to have one little slice of cake because I have to keep my sugars up because I have diabetes. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. But basically, a lot of the illnesses that we experience have a lot to do with the poison that we're taking into our body. You walk into a grocery store and everything in the middle aisles has excess salt or excess sugar or these substances that you can't name. Okay, now I've been told if you see substances that have got these long names, they're probably not good. Okay, and so, and let me say one other thing. When we talk about raising children and helping children become successful in education, let's start off by feeding them. Don't expect them to learn on empty stomachs. And I'm just not just talking about native kids. What did they say? 17 million children in the United States go hungry every day. 17 million, and about 70 million Americans also similarly go hungry every day. If they don't have nourishing food, how do you expect them to function? Our politicians don't want to do that, eh? Did you know that in order to increase the amount of money for school lunches, they took it from food stamps? Now tell me how that doesn't make sense. Why don't we take some from those wealthy landowners that get all these tax breaks? I better stop there. Yeah, dear. Sorry.
That's why Ed handles special projects, because he knows a lot about a lot of different stuff. So if you ask him a question, he can usually answer it. So thank you for having me. I'm actually filling in. Originally, Lacey Harris was scheduled to talk about this, and Lacey actually was one of my mentors. He actually is a social worker, like I am. He went to school with my father, who also wanted to be a social worker. My dad did not finish college because he had 5 kids and had to figure out how to take care of them, and you don't make a lot of money as a social worker. My mom is also a social worker who told all her kids not to go into social work, but there's 2 of us who have. And the other legacy that I got from my parents is that we have a deep commitment to work with Native people, to work with our families. My sister is a social worker with the Ute tribe. She works with the victims of crime, and so has gotten a lot of education with working with victims of domestic violence, families with domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as other horrific things that happen. Before that, she worked with traumatized kids mostly. She's very talented in that respect. My I work at the Urban Indian Center as a professional social worker. As a master's level, I've only worked with Indian people. And I don't know if I could work with other people, frankly, but it's something that I love. And I feel like the work that I do is because I was very lucky as a Native person. My family, we did not live on the reservation. That's not one of the reasons I feel lucky. But we did not live on the reservation because my parents wanted us all to go to college. And they felt like if we stayed on the reservation, there would be a lot of barriers for us to do that. So we grew up in the city. And amazingly, all of my siblings have been to graduate school, which is, not very common in most families, let alone Native families. And all of us, except for one, have a master's degree. So I'm very proud of that in our family. My brother's a teacher, and my mom works with Title VII. So we're all kind of connected with Native kids, and families in general is really important to us. So kind of the things I want to kind of focus on, I asked Jeanette, okay, well, what was Lacey going to talk about? So some of the things I'm kind of going to touch on are a little bit about safety planning, what may or may not be different with Native people. Therapy, I'm going to a little bit touch on traditional healing, but that's not my strength, so I'm not going to talk a lot about that versus traditional therapy. And then what was the last one? Oh, what the differences in therapy with Native people as opposed to mainstream people, which are not going to be that different, frankly. So when I give this kind of presentation, I basically tell people I'm not going to tell you anything new, right? But I think when you're working with people that look different from you or have different cultures from you or their experiences are totally different, we get a little nervous about whether or not we can actually work with those people. And so some of the things that I've heard here today really are the basis of I'm just going to reiterate those things. Relationship is key, and I think working in this field, you guys know that, right? That you sometimes have a short period of time or you come from very different backgrounds from the people that you're working with, and you may not know, what you're going to do or how you're going to connect with this person, but you probably have learned that you need to connect with them somehow. Somehow, as helpers, we need to help people understand that I'm here for you and I want to help you, right? And probably the other thing that you probably learned is that people's stories are important, and that's something I think that has been reiterated here. I wasn't here for the first day, but people have a story to tell, and it's very important to hear that story. And I think one of the things that is problematic with the way that mainstream therapy and safety planning and the processes to come to shelter and all of these things, there's a checklist that most people have to follow through. And when you're working with any people, but Native people in particular, we don't always fit into those boxes. So when I first went to college, I wanted to be a psychologist. I thought that, and particularly I wanted to work in the field of what was then called, a long time ago, abnormal psychology. That was very fascinating to me to think about how people think that's different, really different, right? And so I wanted to study that. But as I went through, and psychology is fascinating to me, but the hard thing for me about psychology is you have to fit people into categories. And my own experience and the experience of the community around me, it didn't work. Fitting people, making people fit into a category was really hard for me because for me, people are complex and their experiences are really varied, and it definitely builds who we are, right? And so it's very hard sometimes to check the box and figure out okay, what's the label or the category that I'm going to put on this person? Because nobody fits perfectly in those little categories. So my, just to kind of back up a little bit, the resource list that I gave you is really just, Sheldon was saying data is your friend, use data. It's just there to kind of back up the experience that I've had working with people. In psychology, in therapy, that validation is very important. People are all about using evidence-based research or, peer-reviewed studies. So that's what that list is all about. But it's hard to find that stuff. Unless you are in the field, have a lot of money, can access journals and pay money to read these articles, you can't get them. So the ones that I have provided, there's a link out there if you want to read them. So, but basically, so it's a structured, verified justification for the things that I've learned, and probably a lot of the stuff that you guys know already, that relationships are important. So the one that I'm really going to focus on is, if you took a look at it, and it's very short, so if you read it afterwards, it's best practices in counseling Native Americans. It's a little study about like a questionnaire. So the opening line is, what should counselors and psychologists do to make sure their work with Native Americans is culturally appropriate and effective? You know, a lot of times when you get funding from certain places, and it's mostly tied to money, right? They want to make sure that whatever you're doing is culturally appropriate, but there's not a lot of guidance in what that actually means. And there's not a lot of acknowledgement that people are different depending on their experiences, depending on where they are, if you grew up on the reservation, if you grew up in the city. And this idea of culture sometimes, I think, can be a barrier and kind of get in the way. When Ed and I were talking about what we were going to talk about, he said something that really struck me. So I'm going to quote him because I wrote it down. He said, and he works in youth programs, and the same thing, culture, culture, culture. We have to include culture, which it is important. But he said, we romanticize culture, but culture is about living, and we tend to forget that, right? And the thing that I have learned about culture, and one of the things that Lacey actually, as my mentor said to me, is that our culture is important. But we, as Native people, didn't survive by sticking to one idea. Our culture evolved. We as people evolved, and we had to evolve as our environments evolved. And even though we were put on reservations and we were put in this one place, we didn't stay stuck in time, right? And I think that that's part of, as the law and all these other institutions, that's kind of the idea that people still have about us, that we are these romantic, historical Indians, and that's not really true. If you ever see me, like, this is the way that you're going to see me. And most people actually identify me as Mexican, not as Indian. So when I identify myself, I tell people all the time who I am. And that has become a part of, as I've grown up and felt more comfortable and done my own education about my own identity, I'm definitely much more comfortable in saying who I am. So I'm an enrolled member of the Ute Indian tribe. My band is Unkapagre. My mother is part Hopi and part Chinese. So, and that's a big part of who I am, even though, you know, you don't necessarily see it in my face or in my presentation. So I think as you're working with Indian people and you're trying to be sensitive and aware of culture, the biggest thing that you have to recognize is that culture means, just like with our list, right? Culture and identity and our values are individual, and they're, you may be able to, your client may be able to articulate what that means to them, or they may not have the language to do that. And that's really part of building that relationship, is having those conversations about who they are, what's important to them, what are their values, and how are they living their life, or how do they want to live their life that reflects that. You know, I think part of the frustration when you work, I've worked in substance abuse a long time, I've worked with domestic violence. Part of the frustration as a helper comes when you're working with people who are struggling with these issues, is they tell you what's important to them, but you don't always see them doing that. And part of, you know, like what Ed was saying, when all of these things that are important to them are taken away, not just immediately, but historically and over and over and over again, it becomes very hard to be able to see, how do I match what I value with the things that I'm doing every day, right? And when we're dealing with stuff like, you know, substance abuse, with child abuse, with domestic violence, those are other barriers that get in the way of being able to practice our identity and our values in a way that's really meaningful. Somebody else talked about, I think Leslie said, self-actualization, right? And when you're working with people who have been traumatized, that is the last thing that people are either thinking about or capable of doing, right? And so part of our work is to help people establish all of these little things, right? Freedom, when I say little, they're not really little, right? Freedom, safety, food, a safe place to live, you know, a roof over their head. And I know working, you know, in substance abuse, our programs run anywhere from like, I think 12 weeks to 24 weeks, right? That's a short period of time to be able to establish your basic living needs, let alone get to self-actualizing. You know, for a lot of people, putting a plan together and setting goals is impossible. You say that to people, right? Most of the time in intake, we sit down, we ask a lot of questions, we do the risk assessment, and then we ask them to set a goal, right? And in my experience, that is a struggle for lots of people. Maybe they don't know what a goal is. Maybe they don't know how to set a goal. Maybe they don't know how to get to their goal, right? But that is often a requirement to get services from us. And so taking a look at any kind of treatment, any kind of safety plan, offering any services, we need to be really mindful that what we're asking people, again, it comes down to language, right? Our understanding of what we're asking people may be totally foreign. It may be like speaking a different language to ask that person, let's set a goal, what are you going to work on, right? So again, the relationship becomes very important and language becomes very important, that you find a common ground and that you figure out, are we talking about the same thing? Are we on the same page here? And if I'm right here, you know, one of the basic tenets of social work, and one of the big things that drew me to that is that you meet the client where they are. And you probably have all heard that, you know, a million times. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what that means because where we are is miles away from, you know, maybe we've never been where that client's been at. That we don't understand that this person cannot tell you what their goal is or how they're going to keep their kids safe because they're worried about, my kids haven't eaten for 2 days. That maybe in that case where we haven't eaten for 2 days, I don't have the nourishment in my body to be able to think cognitively about these things that you're asking me, or to even concentrate about what you're saying to me, right? And those are probably behaviors that seem very familiar when you're talking, when you think back about the clients that you're working on. So let me jump ahead to safety planning really quick, and then I'll come back to this little article. So again, just speaking about language, I wanted to take a look at 2 different things. So probably most of you have seen this one, right? The UDVC safety plan. So just a little brochure, kind of tells who they are, what are the what's the phone number that you can call, and then on the inside talks about safety. Safety during an explosive incident, safety in your home, safety with a protective order, safety at work. A lot of words here, right? Really important information, and sometimes you need to have it in a really concise way. Give it to the client to let them figure out, like, okay, what do I do? Let me keep this, you know, what do I do? So I just wanted to show you the Ute tribe, they kind of re-envisioned the safety plan. And it's essentially the exact same information, right? But one of the things that really struck me with this one is that the picture, so on this one, safety is the big thing that popped out on me for this one, right? We want you to be safe, we want you to think about safety. On this one, what popped out on me is that there's a picture of your family. It helps reinforce the reason why we're talking about safety. Who are we trying to keep safe? What is important to you? Why is safety important to you? You know, as a CPS worker, I think a lot of times people probably thought when I was talking to them about safety, it was just something that I was checking off. You need to tell me that you're keeping your family safe or I'm going to take your kids away, right? And that was a piece of it. But a lot of that work that I did was really trying to find my way to help people understand that I'm not your enemy. I am here to help try to keep you safe. And maybe you don't necessarily know how to think about safety in a linear fashion, because when your life's chaotic, it's hard to think in a linear fashion. And if you've grown up in a chaotic world, you probably don't know how to think in a linear fashion. It probably makes no sense to you at all. And ultimately, it may not be useful to talk to clients about it in that way, right? And so this really kind of helped me to understand the evolution of my own personal thinking about safety and helping people. That filling out boxes and filling out lines ultimately might not be helpful for some of the clients. It may be for some people. Being able to put everything down in one place and take a look at that might be helpful for some people. But for a lot of people, it's not. And so you do have to be creative when you think about, how do I think outside of the box? And that relationship, again, is important because you want to know, how is your client thinking, what's going to be helpful for them, because they may not be able to articulate that for you. So that was just one example of that. How much time do I have? Okay. So I'm going to go through just some of the questions that they asked on this little survey because I thought it was really interesting. So it's a very small survey. 68 people took the survey. They did not break out who was Native and who was not. They didn't pull the Native answers out. They just looked at it all together because it was very small. And that's one of the things when you look at research among Native Americans. It's either not out there, or it's very small, or it's kind of outside the box research. So luckily, I was very impressed that I was able to find, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 articles that were available pretty freely. There were some others, and then there was one other one that was really hard for me to read, so I wasn't going to torture you guys with it. And it was super long. But 6 articles that had actually taken a look at Native Americans and the needs that we have. So I think when I looked at this once before, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there were maybe 2 articles that I could find. So it doesn't seem like a lot of progress, but to me that was huge. So the first question is, what should counselors do in the first session to build rapport with Native American clients? So do you guys have any idea? Well, first of all, how many of you have worked with Native clients? Okay, so you might have some ideas, right? So what do you think that people would answer to that? In the very first session, what could you do to connect with Native clients? Smudge, okay.
Listen, show empathy, validation.
Right. So that's not different than any other client, right? No. Right. All right, so the answers in that survey were clients should be warmly welcomed and offered refreshments, right? So we talked about food, right? Food is comfort to most people, right? And among most Native people, that's especially true. When you go to somebody's house, you usually will be welcomed with some kind of food, right? So offered refreshments such as water, coffee, or tea. One of the things that I think is just really, to me, it's very amusing. And partly it's because I grew up in an LDS home, right? So we didn't drink coffee. But anytime you have an event, a Native event, especially with the elders, you need to have coffee. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. It could be 9 o'clock at night. You got to have coffee. So, and if you don't, if they're comfortable with you, they'll let you know. When we have our Thanksgiving event, the elders don't care about the food so much as they do. Where's the coffee? Is the coffee ready? Can somebody get me some coffee? So, at the Urban Indian Center in Los Angeles, that's one of the things that their elders program has in the center is a little coffee shop because the elders wanted to be able to meet over coffee. And that's the way that they connect with each other and they connect with other people in the community and they connect with the service providers as well. So the client should be invited to describe the problem or issue from their point of view. So again, talking about culture, storytelling is the way that Indian people learned how to be Indian people. It's the way that our values and the things that our traditions, our beliefs were handed down, right? A lot of Native languages, there's no written language, right? It's an oral tradition. We tell our stories. And oftentimes when you ask somebody, I don't know so much about now, but in previous generations, when you ask somebody how they are, you would get a story that would kind of get you to where they were, which was frustrating for doctors and therapists and people like that. So you need to be able to give your client space to tell their story and tell you in a way that feels comfortable for them, which sometimes means it's going to take more than 15 minutes, right? In this world where insurance and money does everything, you have 15 minutes often to talk to people and that's it. You're never going to get anybody's story in 15 minutes, right? And if the perception is that I only have a limited amount of time to talk to you, people are smart and they'll figure out, you don't want to hear my whole story, so I'll tell you what you want to hear. And you may not be able to help them or get to what's really going on with them. There's this thing in the world of therapy called the doorknob confession. And what that means is that people come in, they tell you what is called their presenting problem. So you hear about what the big problem is. And often if there is that connection with your client as they're walking out the door and their hands on the doorknob, they'll tell you, oh, hey, by the way, there's this going on, right? So it's like, oh, great, now we've got all this other stuff we need to deal with as well. But instead of looking at that as problematic, I think that people should start understanding that this means that that person trusts you, that they're willing to, explore that connection with you and talk about what's really going on with you. So don't be afraid of the doorknob confession. The other thing I think that in shelter work and all this other kind of work where confidentiality is key, we are definitely taught about boundaries, and I think boundaries are definitely important. As a professional, you have professional boundaries that will affect whether or not you have a job, whether or not you can work with people if you violate those boundaries. However, one of the things that was taught, that I have definitely learned in my career, is that you need to figure out what's a strict boundary and what's where is that line kind of fuzzy. When I started working as a social worker, as a CPS worker, we went through a 9-week orientation. Can you imagine sitting in orientation for 9 weeks from 8 to 4:30? It was insane. But one of the things that was really stressed to us is that you cannot accept gifts from your clients, right? And there's sound reasoning behind that. But this was really a struggle for all of my peers who were not white and who grew up in, kind of close to their culture, because food is really a way of communicating among our people, right? So, and that was really stressed. If someone offers you a drink, you can't take it, which just, I don't know, seems ridiculous to me. So that's one of my soft boundaries, right? I understand that somebody offering me food or tea or a drink is a way of them connecting with me. And so if I refuse that, that's shutting down that barrier, that's putting a barrier right there between that connection and them, that person thinking that I can understand them. To me, a drink or food is not that big of a deal, right? And as a kid, it was definitely reinforced. When you go to people's houses, people offer you food. For me, growing up in the city, sometimes going home, you're like, what is that, right? Like, it's not familiar to you. And my parents told us, you need to be polite, you need to accept this gift for what it means. And, they really did a good job at helping us to understand what that offering of food meant. So second, are Native American counselors more effective with Native clients than non-Native counselors, or is there no difference, right? So the answer to this question is, half of them said Native counselors are more effective, 20% said there's no difference, 18% said it depends on the cultural competence, and 12% said that it depends on how traditional the client is. So it is important that as Native people that we do work in our communities, that we are helpers. I think it's also important that our responsibility as Native helpers is to reach out and do things like this, right? To help educate our peers, because we are only 1.5% of the total population, so we can't be everywhere. Our people are overrepresented in domestic violence and sexual assault, and so we can't be everywhere, and our resources are very limited. So we have to depend on our partners. But this kind of reaching out and connection is key, and that's a big reason why when I do help do presentations like this, is that I say that you have the skills, you have the resources to be able to do this, and to not be afraid to touch on those talents that you actually have, because those talents working with people work with all people, right? But it is also your responsibility, just like it's my responsibility to try to help educate people about our differences and what's important to respect. It's your responsibility as a non-Native person to do your education yourself and take that in and try to use them. So, which speaks to the other ones. So what is the most significant barrier that prevents urban Natives from getting counseling for their problems? This, I think, happened up in Logan, this questionnaire. So. Half of them said that Native American counselors are more, Many respondents said that stigma, mistrust, or fear of being judged is a barrier, right? And that's, again, is not different from anybody. We don't want to be judged. We don't want to be misrepresented. We don't want to be misunderstood. And so that relationship and that empathy is definitely key. What should counselors or counseling centers do to make potential Native American clients more comfortable? And again, providers should build relationships with the local Native communities. You cannot understand a person in a vacuum. You need to know where they come from. And Ed's little exercise here kind of talked about some of these things that are important in understanding who a person is, who is their identity, because assets of all, or key components of this are part of everybody's identity, right? To varying effects. How important is it to incorporate spirituality into counseling with Native American clients? So a majority, 55% of the respondents said it's very important. 41% said it depends on whether spirituality is important to the client. Only 4% said it's not important, right? And I think if you think in your own lives and with other like non-Native clients, most people can tell you a little bit about their spirituality. They may not understand it in that way, right? And so working in an urban center in substance abuse, this is something that I kind of came to an understanding about. That if you ask somebody, are you religious or are you a spiritual? If you ask someone if they're religious, they'll tell you straight out yes or no, right? If you ask them about spirituality, a lot of them will tell you they're spiritual, but they may not be able to articulate what that exactly means to them, right? And so that relationship is going to become important to find out what does that mean. And one of the ways that we worked on that with our clients in the substance abuse group was really focusing on values. What do you value? What's important to you? And understanding where those values come from. Do they come from your tribal affiliation? Do they come from the community that they live in? Do they come from the experiences that you came from? Because everybody's understanding of their own spirituality, again, that's another journey, right? And so being able to build a relationship that lets people feel safe enough to talk about that will help you to understand what's going to be meaningful to them as you're helping them. Should non-Native counselors use Native health practices such as talking circles, purification ceremonies, etc.? So I was glad to read this because this is what I really believe. Most respondents, 60%, said this is not appropriate since it may be seen as patronizing and it may be harmful. This is one of the things that I have as a therapist that is really bothersome to me, that when you just take somebody's culture and try to use it without having an understanding or being someone who really lives it or is to a certain extent accepted as a practitioner, somebody who's respected in knowing the ways and knowing what that means, because again, that's also very nuanced, right? You know, I can't, if you're an LDS person, you know, I can't come in as a therapist and say, hey, you know, I'm your Relief Society president, let me tell you, you know, the way that you should live your life, because I'm not. So and I have seen, there's actually a really, I don't know how successful it is, but there's a program in Salt Lake that's been touted as being somewhat successful for domestic violence. And the ideas are really sound, but when I went to the training, part of it uses a talking circle, and they did not talk about where that came from. They did not identify that this is a specific Native American practice or where it came from, and that really turned me off on actually using it. It may be effective, it may be totally useful for the people that use it, but because it took a practice that is considered sacred and has a specific place in certain Native cultures, to me, it was very hard for me to be able to justify using that. Am I done? What time is it?
20 after.
Okay. So this one the article that I'm looking at, the best practices, very easy to read. Even if you're not a therapist or not, you know, interested in that, very easy to read and gives you some good stuff to kind of think about if you're Native and if you're non-Native. So thank you again so much for letting me talk a little.